The bell above the diner door gave a soft little ring as it opened. It was the kind of sound that had lived in that building for decades, the same gentle chime that had greeted farmers before sunrise, truck drivers on long hauls, and families stopping in after Sunday church. Harper's Corner Diner sat just off a quiet stretch of highway in northern Missouri. Nothing fancy. Just warm lights, wooden booths worn smooth by time, and the comforting smell of chicken broth and fresh bread drifting through the air. On this particular afternoon, the place was unusually full. 77 motorcycles were lined up outside like a long row of resting horses. Chrome shining in the pale sunlight. Leather jackets draped over chairs. Boots tucked beneath tables. The riders belonged to a traveling group called the Iron Shepherds. Most of them were men in their 50s and 60s. Gray in their beards. Lines around their eyes that only years of wind and road could carve. Inside the diner, the room hummed with the low rumble of conversation. Stories about old highways. Stories about children grown and gone. Stories about friends they used to ride with, who now live mostly in memory. At the counter stood Martha Ellison, the diner's owner. Martha was 63, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun and the steady patience of someone who had served coffee to 3 generations of travelers. She poured another cup for a writer named Frank Delaney, a broad-shouldered man with a beard the color of winter frost. Frank had spent most of his life driving long-haul trucks before trading 18 wheels for 2. He smiled gently as Martha topped off his mug. "Best coffee on this highway," he said. Martha chuckled softly. "You boys say that every year." The riders laughed quietly. There was something peaceful about the moment. The kind of peace that comes when people have lived long enough to appreciate small things. Warm soup. A full chair. A familiar road. And then the diner door opened again. The bell gave its little ring. But this time, the room slowly, quietly, changed. A small boy stepped inside. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. His name was Caleb Whitaker. Caleb wore a faded blue hoodie that hung a little too big on his shoulders. His sneakers were scuffed at the toes. One lace dragged slightly on the floor. Behind him stood a woman who looked tired in the way only young mothers sometimes do. Her name was Rachel Whitaker. She held the door for a moment, hesitating as she glanced around the crowded diner. 77 bikers can be an intimidating sight. Leather vests. Heavy boots. Weathered faces. But Rachel seemed less afraid than simply unsure. She gently nudged Caleb forward. "Go on, honey," she whispered. The boy walked slowly toward the counter. Martha leaned down with a warm smile. "Well, hello there, sweetheart." Caleb looked up at her with wide brown eyes. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he carefully reached into the pocket of his hoodie. His small fingers pulled out a few coins. He placed them on the counter, one by one. a quarter, 2 dimes, 3 nickels, 7 pennies. They made soft clicking sounds on the worn surface. Caleb counted quietly under his breath. Then he looked up at Martha and asked, in the most polite voice imaginable, "I have $1.37. Is that enough for soup?" The words were gentle, simple, but something about them drifted through the diner like a slow wind. The writers stopped talking. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The quiet spread from table to table until the only sound left was the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Frank Delaney glanced toward the boy, then at the coins, then back at the boy again. Caleb waited patiently. Not embarrassed. Not demanding. Just hopeful. Rachel stood near the door, watching quietly. Martha looked down at the coins, then at Caleb's face. Her voice came out soft. "Sweetheart, are you hungry?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated before adding something that made the room even stiller. "My mom said soup helps when your stomach hurts from being empty." Rachel lowered her head slightly. The truth has a way of sounding different when spoken by a child. Frank slowly pushed his chair back. It made a soft scrape against the floor. 76 other writers turned to watch him. Frank walked to the counter. His heavy boots sounded loud in the quiet diner. He looked down at the coins, then crouched so he was eye level with Caleb. "What kind of soup were you hoping for, buddy?" Caleb thought about it. "Chicken noodle." Frank smiled. "Good choice." He gently slid the coins back toward Caleb. "Tell you what," Frank said. "I think your money might be just a little short today." Caleb's shoulders dropped slightly. But before the disappointment could settle in, Frank continued, "So we're gonna have to do something about that." He stood up and turned toward the room. 76 bikers were watching. Frank rubbed the back of his neck and spoke in a calm voice. "Boys, looks like we got a problem." A writer at the far booth raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem?" Frank pointed gently toward Caleb. "This young man here came in with $1.37. A pause. "And that ain't nearly enough." The room stayed quiet. Then an older writer named Walter Briggs slowly reached into his pocket and placed a $10 bill on the table. Another writer did the same. Then another. Then another. No loud speeches. No grand gestures. Just quiet understanding. Within a minute, the tables were covered with folded bills. Martha blinked in surprise. Frank walked back to the counter and smiled at Caleb. "Well now, looks like we fixed the problem." Caleb tilted his head. "How?" Frank nodded toward the room. "Turns out, 77 bikers were also hungry. Caleb looked around at the riders. They smiled gently back at him. Martha wiped the corner of her eye and turned toward the kitchen. "All right then," she said softly. "Let's make some soup. And not just one bowl." That afternoon, Caleb and Rachel sat at a booth surrounded by the quiet kindness of strangers. Caleb ate 2 bowls of chicken noodle soup, and a grilled cheese sandwich, and a slice of warm apple pie someone insisted he try. Rachel sipped coffee with trembling hands while Martha packed a bag with fresh bread and canned soup for later. Frank sat across from Caleb, listening as the boy talked about dinosaurs in school and the stray cat that sometimes visited their apartment. The riders didn't rush. No one checked their watches. Sometimes the road can wait. When Caleb finally finished eating, he looked around the room again. "Thank you," he said shyly. Frank gave a slow nod. "Son, someday you'll understand something." Caleb leaned forward. "What?" Frank rested his arms on the table. "When people ride the road long enough, they learn something important." "What's that?" Frank smiled. "That nobody gets very far alone." The riders finished their meals not long after. Engines eventually started outside. Leather jackets were zipped. Helmets fastened. But before they left, each man passed the booth where Caleb sat. Some gave a wave. Some offered a gentle pat on the shoulder. And a few left quiet words Caleb might not fully understand until many years later. Rachel stood near the door, her eyes shining with gratitude. Frank paused before stepping outside. He crouched again beside Caleb. "You take care of your mom, all right?" Caleb nodded seriously. "Yes, sir." Frank smiled once more and walked toward the long row of motorcycles waiting in the afternoon sun. As the engines rumbled to life and the riders pulled onto the highway, Martha stood in the diner doorway watching them go. Then she looked back inside. At the empty bowls. The scattered laughter still lingering in the air. And the small boy who had walked in with $1.37. Sometimes kindness arrives quietly. Not with applause. Not with headlines. Just a bowl of soup. A room full of strangers. And 77 riders who remembered, somewhere deep inside their weathered hearts, that everyone